It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another one. We're back to talk about The Walking Dead. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at Tales of the Walking Dead. I'm going to explain what it is, what sort of stories we might see in Tales of the Walking Dead, and I'm going to talk about how this is different from everything else Walking Dead related that we've seen. So first things first. At the moment, we pretty much have three main Walking Dead shows. We have The Walking Dead, its spin-off Fear the Walking Dead, and we have the third spin-off, which is called The Walking Dead World Beyond. Now, based on the big news that came out recently, we know that season 11 of The Walking Dead will be its final season. After that point, we're only going to be left with both Fear the Walking Dead and The Walking Dead World Beyond. However, World Beyond is only a limited 2-season series, and it will actually end when season 11 of The Walking Dead's original ends. So that means we're only left with Fear the Walking Dead. And we don't really know whether Fear the Walking Dead is gonna get a 7th season or not. So we don't necessarily know if Fear is gonna be around at that time. But for the sake of this video, let's pretend that Fear is still gonna be around at that point. We also know that we're gonna get a 4th show, which is gonna revolve around Daryl Dixon and Carol Pelletier. We don't have a title for that, but we know that it's gonna be coming up after season 11 ends. Now, aside from these shows, we also have what they call Tales of the Walking Dead. And Tales of the Walking Dead is basically stories about characters of the past. It's like backstories for characters from the past, characters who are either no longer in the story, no longer with us, like dead characters, or characters who are mentioned but we didn't really see them. Or even characters who are still around but we haven't fully delved into their past or future story as much as we need. So with that said, let's go through the characters that I think we might see an episode about. The first character is actually Glenn. Glenn is one of the first characters everyone thinks of when we talk about Tales of the Walking Dead. Now, in terms of what sort of a story you could tell about Glenn, whatever it is, it must be a story about Glenn before he met up with Rick and the gang. Because if it's not, then we've seen it already. Ever since Glenn was introduced, we've seen his story step by step, and we haven't really missed too much of Glenn's story as far as he's been in the story. So if you want to tell a story about Glenn, it has to be before he met with Rick and the gang. It could be about his life before the apocalypse as well. Next is Abraham. Abraham, just like Glenn, could be a good character for them to explore their backstory. Just like Glenn, we've seen Abraham's story step by step ever since he was introduced. There wasn't too much gaps. If they want to tell a story about Abraham, it has to be a story about his past before we saw him on the original show. It could be a story related to Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene and their journey before they met up with Rick and the crew. It could even be a story about Abraham before the apocalypse. Next up is the Governor. Now, the Governor is one of those interesting characters who is very, very popular even though he hasn't been on the show for a very long time. And there's lots of people who are still interested to get some sort of a backstory or some sort of an episode about the Governor and for the show to explore his past. The Governor's backstory was actually explored in several books. That story actually revolved around how the Governor became the Governor and his rise to power. So I could definitely see them do like an episode telling us that story from the books. Next up is another big bad of The Walking Dead, Negan. Now, Negan is an interesting one because they could do several things with him. If they want, they can do like a Negan miniseries. They could do a Negan spin-off series. They could do a Negan movie. There's enough story, I think, for him to get something like that. And I'm obviously using the comic source material as a reference point. So as far as Negan's story is concerned, in the comics, we have the Here's Negan, which is a backstory for Negan. And we also have the Negan Lives, which is a continuation of his story. as well. So they could do those stories and maybe many, many more stories for Negan in a spin-off, a movie, or they could do it in one of the episodes in Tales of the Walking Dead. Next, we have Simon, Negan's right-hand man. Now, Simon, of course, was also very popular when he was around. And also at the same time, you could say he was even as charismatic as Negan was in certain episodes of The Walking Dead when he was around. So I'm sure, again, fans would be interested to see him back on the show and for them to explore his past and his backstory a little bit. Now, on the show, what they did is Simon was part of the Sanctuary way before Negan came around. He was one of the Saviors before the Saviors officially formed. So what you could do is you could tell a story in that period of time when Negan wasn't part of the Sanctuary and it was Simon and others. And what's very interesting is you could actually make Negan cameo at the very end. And when Negan shows up, that would be the end of the Simon era, you could say, the beginning of the Negan era. Now, the other thing we do need to keep in mind is we don't know whether Simon was actually in charge before Negan. It seems like he wasn't, but maybe in that backstory they could have it so that Simon slowly gains power of the Saviors, and then when Negan shows up, he takes his power away from him, or something along those lines. Another character is Merle. Now, Merle is also one of those characters that was a very popular character when he was around, and I'm sure many fans would be interested to see him back on the show, somehow. Next up, we have Shane. Shane is a very, very popular character, and I feel like fans would jump on the idea of seeing his backstory. So I think that he's another character that is relevant enough, is important enough, and is popular enough for them to invest the time to have in the Tales of the Walking Dead. And plus, if they do like a backstory with Shane, it's an opportunity to bring back Rick as well. Of course, Andrew Lincoln, who plays Rick Grimes, looks different now, so it will be a challenge to make it realistic, but at the same time, I think that if they really want to do it, they could definitely do something with Rick in a Shane-centric Tales of the Walking Dead episode. Next up is Dr. Edwin Jenner. Now, the only reason I have Dr. Edwin Jenner in here is because it could be a great way to connect the dots and connect the story that they're exploring on World Beyond. For those of you that don't know, it has been confirmed that there is going to be some sort of a cure story on The Walking Dead's World Beyond story. So I think they could definitely circle back to Dr. Edwin Jenner to connect the dots a little bit as far as the stories that they might be exploring on World Beyond. Next up is Madison Clark from Fear the Walking Dead. She's actually the most likely character from Fear the Walking Dead to be getting a Tales of the Walking Dead episode. So I think that if she's going to come back, that's the only way to bring her back. So I think most fans would jump at the idea of seeing her again, and this would be a great way to bring her back. Now, in terms of is there enough story for her, I feel like no, because we saw everything. You know what I mean? But then again, it could be before the apocalypse. And if they do that, then again, there's a chance to bring back Travis, Nick, Chris, Alicia, and so on. Next character is Troy. Troy is actually one of those characters that died too early, I think, and interesting enough of a character to continue on. So I think that there's definitely an opportunity for them to do something with Troy in these Tales of the Walking Dead. Now, a couple months ago, there was actually some rumors that he's gonna come back to Fear the Walking Dead, but obviously that was never gonna happen because we saw him die. So I wonder if those rumors came about because he was in talks with AMC to appear on Tales of the Walking Dead in the future. And I think that it makes sense if that's what it is. Next up from Fear the Walking Dead is Tobias. Now, I've never been a Tobias fan myself. He didn't really do much in the story anyway, but I know that he has a lot of fans. He's a popular character despite being on the show for maybe like less than 5 episodes. But I feel like he is one of the characters that could definitely get a backstory because we didn't really see too much of him. Last but not least, we have Walker from Fear the Walking Dead. Much like Troy, I feel like Walker was one of those people that was interesting, and he was one of the characters that I was actually more excited to get to know more and things like that, which we obviously didn't. But I feel like he's another character that they could bring in Tales of the Walking Dead, and the good thing about him, and also Tobias to an extent, is that it doesn't just have to be a backstory. It could be a story about them in the current timeline or something like that, because they are not dead. Not as far as we know. And that's pretty much everyone I think may appear in Tales of the Walking Dead. Now, there could be tons of other ones that I just didn't include or I forgot or whatever, but this is just the initial list that I came up with. With that, I want to know everyone's thoughts and opinions. Which one of these do you agree with? And do you have any other people in mind who may appear in Tales of the Walking Dead? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, share and smash the like button. Subscribe to join our community and press the bell to be notified when I upload. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.